so let's get eyes on public too.
We're there now. Thank you, Rebecca.
Yes, thank you. Okay, we'll start over.
You're welcome.
Announcements, open session, and any public comments. Do we have any? Okay, we'll move on to the administrative part. Roll call tonight. We have myself, Chris, we have Joe, Skip, Kevin, and Kurt. I don't see Alfred on. And Will Sullivan is also on. Did I miss anyone? And I see David is on as well for other. Okay, next item is the approval of the minutes of meeting from the February 14th meeting. So again, if you need a few minutes to take a refresher course, go ahead, and following that, we'll entertain a motion to accept the minutes of meeting.
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes of the meeting on February 14th, 2022.
Okay,
I
thank
second that.
Kevin. Thank you, Skip. Okay, vote. Kurt?
Abstain, I wasn't there.
Right. Kevin?
Aye.
Skip?
Aye.
Joe?
Aye.
Chris? Aye. So 4-0. Okay, next item on the agenda is an update on permit and lobbyist activity and some recent discussions. So Will, I believe you have an update to share with us.
Yeah, I do. So I made a little list of them for myself to quote out here. So on February 9th, we had a meeting with the Army Corps mitigation team. And, you know, that was between GEI, the Army Corps mitigation team, and the town. And basically, we wanted to meet with them, and they wanted to meet with us to discuss, you know, how the credits came out. And we kind of wanted to have an understanding of why we're still at this point, and what the credits really meant, and how to mitigate them, you know, a proper strategy for the letter that we were writing for the mitigation. I know that GEI wrote a summary of that for everyone on the 11th, and they sent that out. I guess it wasn't set at the meeting, but basically it was an investigative call to the corps to understand some questions on their response to the mitigation letter. We reviewed the presented projects and why only 2 of these projects were considered. In summary, the 2 projects, the Delta Trust and 12th Conservation Trust parcel purchases, are considered acceptable based on their status, habitat type, and timeline. The other projects were reviewed and had changes that did not make them suitable options, such as use of federal funding, projects that have already been started without the intent of supporting the dredging project, timeline to complete project not aligning with plan for dredging, dissimilar habitats, and success of projects for providing mitigation. Basically an extremely complex way of managing anything, but that's my own take. We are continuing to progress with response to the corps letter and address these 2 projects. With this in mind, and that fact that other presented projects did not meet criteria, we're looking at ways to close the 1.2 credit gap. One way we are looking at doing this is through the review of the conservation credit for the acreage preserved. If anyone is aware of other preservation, mitigation, invasive species removal, or planting projects that are planned with near-term action, please let us know so that we can vet these projects for consideration as well. That was a statement from GEI. Then on the 18th of February, we had a strategy session with our congressional delegation. And that was also with our lobbyist, Ray, who set that up between us, GEI, and the delegation. And basically it was, to try to figure out where we were going to go from here, what the pushes were going to be, what the lobbying activities we're going to go for. And basically what they came up with was to strategize on these two parcels because of the dead weight, where they wanted no mitigation credits for the other ideas that we have for the 10 million reasons why not. So that was worked on behind the scenes from Ray and our congressional delegation. They worked on this extremely hard, and GEI continued to write up and work with the U.S. Army Corps mitigation team to get this narrowed down. Basically, what they've come up with is that it looks like, the two parcels that are transferring to the care of Wellfleet Conservation Trust at this town meeting should be appropriate for the remaining credits. And the only problem is that we need to place the permit on administrative hold, because the properties cannot be counted until they are transferred, which has to happen at town meeting. And then after town meeting, it has to be enacted. So the only final point in that is that'll barter down all the credits. We just have to wait. We got to wait for town meeting, and we got to push that vote to transfer these two parcels. And that'll play a significant role in downsizing any of this. Now, we had a follow-up meeting with the congressional delegation, and that was made aware that town meeting was going to be extended till June. And again, Ray wrote up a little summary, our lobbyist, after this meeting. Thanks for getting together on the phone so we can all remain on the same page. Andrew will touch base with the district ASAP, tell him he was briefed by the town, that he appreciates the district working with the town on this, and that he is eager to see us get a positive result.
Hey, Will, let me interrupt for a minute. Could you identify who Andrew is, or with which entity is he?
Andrew works for the Congressional Office of Keating.
Yes, okay.
So Dan and Melissa from GEI will work over the next few months to finalize the submission to the courts, giving what the courts want in their timeline, which the administrative hold will allow. Basically, the purpose of the administrative hold is because the only other way to mitigate is to put the money that's valued, all those mitigation credits, all that money would have to stay in an escrow account for 10 plus years if we were to not do it this way. And we really don't see a way the town could put up all that mitigation money and put it into an escrow account for all these years. So then Andrew will follow up with the district after submission has been made, convey to the district that Representative Keating believes the town's position is reasonable and that he's hopeful that we can finally get to the end of this process. And that has been our update, working with all those players put together.
But one of the points I want to make sure I got right, it sounds like these two parcels, Hilda and the 18.5 acres in the Conservation Trust, soon to be transferred, will satisfy all necessary credits. Right. We will no longer have 1.2 something credits out there.
And we're just gonna try to wait it out for that. I mean, and the problem with Hidilta is that we need a monitor. We've been told that if we want, that's considered for most of our credits. And we need it to be monitored by someone like Mass Fish and Wildlife or Autobahn or someone like that, to just be an independent monitor, just to make sure that the wild area of the Delta, once it's settled, remains wild. And no future development on that property.
That-
Well, you had mentioned early on that GEI had sent out an email to everyone. Chris, did you receive that email?
Yeah, the email was sent on February 11th, 2022 at 9:42 a.m. Joe, you received it. Chris received it. Ray received it. Rebecca, Russell received it. I received it, and Alyssa received it.
Yeah, Chris, did you receive it?
Yes, I did.
Okay,
I thought you had issued it at the last meeting or prior to the last meeting, but perhaps not. I might be wrong on that. I thought that was, you had sent out a couple of documents. I thought that was one of them, but I'm not 100% sure by any means.
Will, I got a question. Is it the plan that the Hilda property and the 8.5 acres are going to be transferred to the trust, to the conservation trust?
No, not the Hilda property. The two properties, the two parcels that we have on the town meeting. To transfer.
So, do you think if we were to place a conservation restriction on the Hilda Trust, that they would accept that in lieu of monitoring?
No, they specifically said they want someone other than the town.
No, but a CR, a conservation restriction, is enforceable. It's not the town. That would be the conservation trust would then be responsible for overseeing that conservation restriction. It's just like if you take a piece of private land and you put it into, you put it into the trust, it gets a conservation restriction.
Okay, so let me write that down. Kurt, can you give me the exact question so I can send to Alyssa?
Yeah, the question would be, could we apply a conservation restriction to the Hilda Trust in lieu of monitoring?
And would that same question have to apply to the other parcel, the 18.5 acres?
Well, they're going to the trust anyway, which is why the Corps is counting them as being in conservation. So anyway, I would think if we simply put a conservation restriction on the Hilda Trust, that should be sufficient because it's the same thing.
Okay, I'll forward that question to her and then she could find out the information on that.
Because the idea of monitoring is just kind of,
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I would imagine that if they would accept Audubon as a monitor, I would think Audubon would do it on behalf of the town and not really charge us. They would go out there and send people out there and, do science and all kinds of fun stuff and verify that it's continuing to be used for what it was intended to be used for in the first place. But a CR, but a legal CR may be sufficient too.
Okay, all right. Yeah, it was kind of funny considering that because they were kind of like, yeah, we've dealt with towns before and, for some reason down the future, people have different ideas about things. So that may be a good key point.
Yeah, because I think the town would go for a CR, and then effectively the trust and the conservation trust is the enforcer. They go and inspect.
Kurt, my question is, that isn't Hilda in like debate right now with expansion and shellfish grants?
Yeah, I don't think the grants though would violate a conservation restriction because the restrictions are typically upland land.
I understand that, but someone's making an income off it, and I understand the agricultural aspects of that.
Right, but they're accepting. It sounds like the Corps is accepting whatever credits Hilda would count toward. And
Right.
part of what Hilda is doing already is, is shellfish grants. And they don't really, I don't think they're, well, I don't know, but it sounds like they've sort of signed off on the activity that's going on there. And what they want is that the parts that are quote unquote, wilderness don't get developed. But if there's a conflict there, I'm sure it would come out in the process of how that, what area the conservation restriction overlay applies to. Because like, for example, on a private parcel, to make it simple, my mother-in-law, many people do this, my mother-in-law did it. And what happens is you put on the map, you hash out what's going to be put into trust. And then there's a conservation restriction that's filed in the Barnstable County Deeds. And then the Conservation Trust periodically comes out to inspect it to ensure that it's complying with the conservation restriction.
Right. Basically, you sell the development rights.
Yes. Yeah. You're kind of consigning them to never happen. And anyway, it just may be a way, I mean, I'm not sure, but it may be a way to get around, ongoing monitoring, which kind of sounds crazy.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Alfred. Welcome.
Well, I have two questions. One is, why are we turning it over to Conservation Trust? The town of Wellfleet can put its own conservation restriction on it, and the town of Wellfleet's Conservation Committee could be in charge of it. I mean, you're taking a piece of town property, you're basically turning it over to a trust instead of leaving it within the town's ownership to be the town being its custodian of it. I mean, we have land that the town of Wellfleet has put under conservation restrictions the exact same way, and the town of Wellfleet is still the owner, caretaker, and basically inspector of it through the Conservation Committee instead of going to the Conservation Trust.
It sounds like they don't want a town entity though, Alfred. So in other words, to do with, you're not, the ownership of the land doesn't change anyway. The ownership stays the same. It's just the conservation restriction would be applied and deeded, but town still would own it. It would just be the trust that would be doing the inspection to ensure that it's still complying with the restriction.
But the Conservation Committee could probably still do that. I'm a little leery of taking a piece of that, a piece of property that large, and turning it over to the trust, because at that point we might as well just give it to them.
Well, but you're not turning it over.
That's what we did. That's what we're going to do, because if they're in charge of it, and they're going to monitor it.
Yeah, they wouldn't be in charge of it. A conservation restriction only says this particular part of the land won't be developed, and who ensures that it's not being developed is the Conservation Trust. It sounds like the Corps or Fish and Wildlife want a third party to ensure that the compliance is happening. So I don't think that they'd accept the Conservation Commission or the committee as the overseer of the restriction. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because either one's going to certify it.
But that's somewhat embedded in your original question, isn't it, Kurt, about whether they would accept the conservation restriction versus a monitoring plan?
Right.
Isn't that the gist of your question? And somewhat consistent with the point that Alfred just raised, I think.
Yeah.
I think you've got a whole different, I think you've got a whole can of worms you're trying to sell the public as soon as you put Conservation Trust on it. That's where my concern is.
But it's not it's not trust. It's a conservation restriction. It's just a deeded.
I don't disagree with you in any way, shape, or form in that. But you're taking another piece of aquaculture land and you're turning it over to the trust to be its supervisor under the restriction.
But that's what we have to. In order for this to qualify, that's what the Corps is telling us we have to do.
They were very specific in saying that we had to go to the trust and we couldn't use our own conservation committee.
No, you might have missed it. Will was giving us the report up front.
No,
Will,
I had a hard time getting in.
Yeah.
They
Go ahead, Will, you can restate it for Alfred's benefit.
They asked for a specific third or non-specific third-party monitor. They said it could be the Audubon, it could be the Conservation Trust, it could be Mass Fish and Wildlife, but it has to be independent from the town. It cannot be our conservation commission, our conservation agent, myself, could not be.
Okay, I understand where they're coming from now. Thank you, Will. I just,
Yeah.
I think you're going to have a hard sell turning a piece of potential shellfish property into that thing. I think you'd even be better off using the Fish and Wildlife, but that's only my opinion.
That was the original thought from myself. So but we're checking into everything because none of it has to be done right away.
So Will, if you're going to go back and ask about whether a conservation restriction, I guess the question is whether that's acceptable in lieu of a monitoring entity.
Yeah, that was the question.
Okay, and then depending on the answer, maybe would we want to ask whether the following are acceptable monitoring entities: Audubon, yada yada yada.
Yeah, they suggested that possibly Audubon or Mass Fish and Wildlife themselves.
Will, to satisfy Alfred's concern, because it's I share the concern. What's the extent of restriction that the Corps is expecting on the Hilda property? In other words, what are they granting credit for? What kind of restriction are they expecting?
That I don't know. That's a question that I'll have Alyssa explain. I'll get that in writing. So
I mean,
That was my point, Kurt, is
Yeah.
in regards to the whole situation of the shellfish grants and everything.
well, it seems like they've taken it as it appears, and that's what they're willing to consider. So I would think that the monitoring would be that it wouldn't be changing significantly than what it appears at the time that they accept that into permit.
So the question would be, though, I think to both Kevin's and Alfred's and my concern, does that mean that there can be, that they're expecting that no additional shellfish grants will be permitted, or are they regulating below, mean low water? In other words, what exactly are they expecting, on that parcel in order for it to qualify?
All right, we'll get a certain definition on that. But the feeling that was told to us was that at the time that they do accept it and we get all this together, that it's of course within the bounds of Hilda, but that whole property kind of remains as it is when it's accepted.
That could mean no additional shellfish grants could be authorized.
Yeah, that could.
All right, definitely some follow-up questions on that. But it's kind of encouraging that at least we've been able to have some collaborative conversations with them. That's good. So the optimist in me says, let's talk about the 2022 plans. And we spoke last time. We spoke last time about spreading it over 2 years, so that we could get 2 years opportunity on grant. I guess the other thing we should, excuse me, the other thing we should consider is in the first year of dredging of Area 2, should we look to do approximately half the area to the full depth, to the full allowable depth, or should we do essentially the full area down to the 3 or 4 foot depth? So any thoughts on that from people?
my personal opinion
Mm-hmm.
is you want to go to the full depth, because I'll be honest with you, every single mooring you make, you've got to remake it because it's not going to be the right when you change the depth. Second of all, if we get half of the mooring area dredged, that may be able to accommodate what we have. And as we keep going dredging, we may fill it in with the rest of the stuff because the people have caught on this water instead of mud there. I think that to dredge it all to one depth and then come back and do it the next year, I think I'd be opposed to that, and I think it may be more expensive. Because
Okay,
at
those are
that
good
point,
points. Those are good. So essentially you're saying approximately half the area to the full depth, -6 plus a foot over dredge.
that would be my personal
Yeah.
preference.
Okay, any other opinions or preferences or endorsements on the two methods, or a third if you come up with one?
I think that makes the most sense. Plus you're disturbing less acreage when you're doing it.
Yeah,
Your
If you
sediment
can go
levels would be
back
less.
from the main channel and start at the main channel and then
Yeah.
go back, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree.
okay. That is dredging. Okay, next category is the 2022 funding grants. And so we talked previously about the EOHED dredging program. Excuse me, the application did come out shortly after our last meeting. It is due on April the 15th. I've already started a draft. So much of it is a repeat of last year's data. Some of the information, some of the write-ups will change. We certainly will need an update on the shellfish info. So I had sent that out to Nancy. What I propose, I'll finish on a draft and then I can circulate it among this group. Like I say, some of the description obviously changes, the quantities changes, cost estimate changes, but so much of the other marina data will be the same as last year: number of boats, number of slips, so on and so forth. So I think probably by the end of this week I can get it out to the group if people are interested in reviewing it. At that point, it may not have the shellfish update in it, but that'll be forthcoming. So any comments on that? The end of the week should be okay for people. The other thing that changed while I'm thinking of it is the method of submitting it, the application this year is a online portal. It will be one that you can go on, do your input, save it, and come back to it later, and then submit it on or before the 15th of April. The portal will be available starting April 4th. So what I'd like to do is this draft that I'm sending around is the application as it will appear on the portal. We can make all of our comments, edits, updates, etc. To this document, reach agreement before April 4th. And then that's the document and that's the data that we'll input once the portal opens up. So more on that. Go ahead.
How much information do we rely on from the engineer for this?
In looking at it, the plan we can use, the attached plan is an aerial photo, which we can use from last year because it clearly shows area 2. Most of the permits will be the same, but for the one that we're pursuing. And I think that's primarily it. The application, before you fill in the answers, which expands the number of pages a little bit, but the application is about 20 pages. So much of our stuff last year, because I think it was 107, was the permit package. And most of that will be the same. So we can utilize that. So not too much from him. For cost estimate, I think it's appropriate to use our recent 2021 unit rates, including MOB costs. If anything, area 2 might be a little bit easier to dredge than the channels were. So I think we'd have an appropriate cost estimate.
Even though fuel's doubled?
Well,
I don't mean to be the ass in the room, but I mean,
yeah,
I know
yeah. Well, at 30, at an all-in rate of $38 a yard, including MOB, I think so. But we might tweak it a little bit for fuel costs. That is a good point. I guess if Uber can do it, maybe we should too.
I mean, if you watch the trailer truck go down the pier, I mean, what used to cost $5,000 to fill up was $10,000. I mean, I'm just saying that I think there's going to be a huge that portion of it is going to be hugely expanded. So I think we may want to add a few dollars minimum just for speculation.
Yeah. Okay, we'll move on to future plans to reduce sedimentation rate and maintenance dredging. The work list was recently updated. There's a couple of things in red there, representative of the new things. Since our last call, we did have a permit call with Hillary to talk about the sand shoaling off the end of the jetty. So Will and Kurt and I and Hillary kind of noodled through that. What we came up with, mostly from the guidance from Hillary, is that we will need somebody to put together some engineering drawings and the applications for the permits. So we're in the midst of, almost at the end of preparing a draft RFQ where we will go out and solicit prices from engineers. We have a list of engineers that we got from Barnstable County Dredging people, Ken Cirillo, and possibly some others. Kurt, you had a couple of updates on that as well. And we'll see who is available and able to do that. The idea is we would go out with this RFQ during April timeframe. We really, nobody has any money until after June 30. So the award of this would be shortly after July 1st into the next fiscal year. The idea is they would, whoever is successful on this engineering work would produce the drawings. And from that, the quantities, which in my mind, I think might be about 2,000 yards that we would move. And the main thing is the permits, get the permits in place. And these would be, to Kurt's point from that call, these would be recurring, ongoing permits so that they don't have to be renewed every year. So that RFQ, we'll get that wrapped up, and Rebecca,
Would that be used
Russell,
for
can go
beach
ahead and
renourishment? That sand would be used for beach renourishment?
Yeah, we will have to see what the permit allows us to do. I think our preference is to send it back from whence it came. If we can't do that timely due to permit restrictions or any other restrictions, we talked about stockpiling it perhaps in the parking lot at Indian Neck. And then from there, it could be hauled off and used by, in other destinations, but still for beach nourishment, I guess. So that's something that when we get whoever the successful engineer is, we'll have that discussion as to, I think from our perspective, we'll be driven by being able to move the sand sooner rather than later, somewhat independent of final destination. I think our priority is to get it out of there someplace.
And the other thing that, go ahead.
Go ahead. I apologize. Go ahead, Kurt.
Yeah, no, Hillary also mentioned that there's a bank that the Provincetown, Truro, Wellfleet, and I think she said Eastham have formed a coalition for creating sort of a sandbank so that it might actually have some, if you can't recirculate it, and recycle it, which is the ideal thing. She said there are a number of other ways that we could probably deal with it. And the other thing that we talked about, which is different, in terms of this approach, is to survey the entire area. So basically, the area to the west of the L pier, which has always been material that's been taken out and taken up either to Keller's Corner or further up, but do that side as well as the other side, Kevin, where where it's accumulating at the jetty. So you kind of deal with the whole problem, not just part of the problem. And that's what the permits would be, all encompassing to basically handle doing this thing right rather than doing it kind of piecemeal.
It was my understanding that Hillary had an ongoing permit for that side of the L pier.
She does. And that's what we're going to try to mirror on the other side and put it together.
Okay.
Now, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
The permit for the L pier it's restricted to where the sand can go. It has to go back on the same beach in certain places, and I'm not saying that's mandatory in the next one, but the advantage of that is it is cheap enough for people to buy that sand and put back out on the beach versus hauling it out of a foundation, let's say. So at that point, the town can sell it. Because my understanding under the Mass law, we cannot put sand on private property unless the people pay for it. The other question I had is, over at the breakwater, when you talked to Hillary, I wasn't at that meeting, I apologize for that, but when you talked to Hillary, did she also say that Coastal Engineering has done some of this beach renourishment stuff? If the town of Wellfleet hired them to map something, is my question.
She didn't mention anything specific. I don't recall, Chris, do you?
No, I don't. Alfred, are you suggesting that Coastal Engineering would therefore be a candidate to perform this work and obtain the permits?
Well, yes, because
Yeah.
the reason I'm stating that is they drew the master plan or some plan, I don't know what we want to call it, for the culch stuff and everything else in the harbor, because at that point they had all the survey marks for the mooring basin and everything. After a go-round, they finally got it right. I'm not so sure they were furnished the right, but I'm saying is they do have a database too. I don't know what level they are at, and that would be a question whether or not Hillary, because I know Hillary has used them for some things. I'm not saying we should or shouldn't is my question. My question is what do they have in their database for the other stuff? The other thing with Coastal is they are aware of where the majority of the sand goes because they filed for the beach renourishment programs for the private homeowners, a lot of them. So they would know what you could do with an amount of yardage and for where it would end up. The other advantage of the sand in front of the breakwater is if it's like the sand in front of the pier, even though it's a little darker in color, it doesn't migrate as fast. When we put it in front of the seashells and down the yacht club, the stuff stays better. So, I mean, it's something worth, in my opinion, a homeowner acquiring to put in front of their thing for beach renourishment. So it does have a value.
Yeah, we'll definitely add Coastal Engineering to the candidates and find out their capabilities, especially if they have a history. That's good.
I would ask Hillary. That's why I'm only throwing it out to see what they've done to the town.
Hey, Alfred, where you said that Coastal Engineering was doing the culching and the mapping and all that kind of stuff. Do you know 2015, the Article 24 with the harbor mapping, with the town passed $82,000? Do you know?
Was that through Andy's budget?
No, that was actually for the Provincetown Center for Coastal Studies, and that was Mark Borelli, who did a I can never pronounce that right, but a bathymetry study of the entire harbor. So he had a side scan sonar that he was running around to do mapping of the harbor.
Okay, that's what that was for.
Yeah, no, I believe that Andy had, how do I put this? We were putting culch in the water illegally. And because it had to have a map, it had to have a specification, it had to have a period where the culch was actually, air dried, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I believe, because I took the plan to Coastal, and I didn't know Coastal was doing it at that point. Things were a little screwed up, and I don't know what. I wasn't part of the grant to the money aspect. All I heard was at the end that when Andy put the plan in, half of the plan was for where we were dredging. And when I saw that, I freaked out. And Hillary and Mike at that point, and they just handed me the plan, and I took it down to the Coastal for the one we worked with. But that's not the point. I don't know where the money came from or who paid for that plan.
Okay.
So we should ask Hillary if that was a shellfish plan, a marina plan, Ghostbusters plan. I don't know who. But what I'm saying is we may find out that they've already got 2/3 of the information for that area because they were doing the culching program.
Yeah.
Yeah, the culch thing was with Andy, and that was I don't know where she got the money, but it was for a 93A permit to to permit the culching activity.
But I don't know who paid for that, and I don't know whether or not there was more to the plan than just the culching, or if they had to do a study of what they were putting the culch on. So we may know that there's areas where there is no shellfish, and maybe that'll show up in it, that's all.
Yep, you're right.
Okay, next item, which was a follow-up, was Kurt was going to call Audubon to see what level of interest they might have in our world-class black mayonnaise.
I did reach them, and Melissa Lowe Sestero, who's the executive director, basically just suggested getting a team of her people together who are working on marsh restoration. They're also working closely with some of the folks that are working on the Herring River project. Her initial response in my call was, "We don't know anything about that. We don't think it's legal in Massachusetts." And so I said to her, "I'll send you a bunch of the material of projects that are going on in Massachusetts and where this is happening." And she said, "Wow, that would be terrific. We would love to be able to do something with that, even if it wasn't to do, runneling or thin layer deposition." Apparently other Audubons in Massachusetts have used those spoils for bird sanctuary improvement. So she said there's other uses for it, and she's very open to it.
Okay, so there'll be some follow-up on that after she digests it. And the comment about whether it's legal in Massachusetts, I know Skip had mentioned that on the last call. Kurt, I don't think you're on it. Are they warming up to it, or is it truly being used within Massachusetts?
It's truly being used in Massachusetts. They're doing both. It basically is just a process of salt marsh restoration.
Yeah.
And where the state's always had its panties in a wad is they don't like fill. But where a project is being contemplated for, and the projects that were done in Massachusetts already were for mosquito abatement, but basically it's enhancing the salt marsh to both improve the drainage, improve the marsh vegetation, and do it in a way that reduces mosquito production.
Well, we could probably get a quorum for that idea, right?
But yes, the
All
answer
right.
is there were a bunch of permits. They were done in Bristol, a couple of projects done in Bristol County. Somebody with the state, DCR was involved in the project. So the state, there are a whole bunch of players that have been involved in those projects. Audubon would certainly look a lot like a core group. I did reach out also to our mosquito control director at the Cape Cod Mosquito Control for Barnstable, and Gabby Sokolsky. She's very interested in participating. So the people that would get engaged to put together a project and a plan are, would look a lot like the right players that were involved in the other projects. So I don't foresee that we'd have a lot of trouble. And the big issue is kind of figuring out timing and amounts and how often you can do it, and and some of the other particulars. But
And how to get it to the destination.
Right. But the other thing too is, Chris, that it kind of could come together because it's a lot of the same players. So whether you're talking about using Audubon or whether you're the area to the west of the Elephant House is another area where you could do a project, the Herring River, Mayo Creek. So what I think we can get done pretty quickly is to get all of the right players involved in those projects. That's an awful lot of potential use of black mayo for, if we have that many locations that we could potentially be using it.
But you still have to have a storage area and a desalination, dewatering area for it, because you're talking a high volume.
Yeah, we don't know how much volume Herring River or Mayo Creek or Audubon. We don't know. We have no idea at this point what those volumes would be. So I don't know if we'd have to dewater or not. We may or we may not. I don't know.
How would you get it over there?
Kurt, are you
Tom-
talking about thin layer disposition?
Yeah, thin layer deposition. That's right.
And you're talking about Mayo.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, that stuff's ideal for it because it's so rich in nutrient. That's why it's desirable. That's why John Porter,
Desirable, but you're saying that you acknowledge that there are other areas in Massachusetts that have taken the Mayo and thin layered it?
yep. That's what they're doing in these other projects.
What strikes me now, Herring River will take an abundance of it, although obviously several years out. Between now and then, though, it would be good for us if we could arrange to have a demonstration project such as, west of the Elephant House. It looks like there's about 5 acres of marsh in there, Kurt.
Yeah.
A little thin layer deposition where, kind of get the kinks worked out. Kevin, I think it was your question, how we get it there, even to the Herring River, potentially we can pump it there, hydraulic dredge. They can pump up to 1.5 miles. Okay, next item on the agenda, we actually covered the sand and the shoaling about the recent call since it was on the mitigation list. So I think we've covered that already unless there are any other questions on it. All right. Next item is to choose when we should have the next meeting. We stay with Mondays. We have April 4th and April 11th as upcoming Mondays. Any preference on it?
April 4th is good for me.
Okay. Anyone, everyone else okay on the 4th or a preference for the 11th?
4th looks fine to me.
Okay. Everyone good with the 4th?
All right.
Okay.
I'll do what I can.
Okay. Okay, next item. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And we need a second.
Second it.
All right, on to the vote. Alfred,
Aye.
Kurt,
Aye.
Kevin,
Aye.
Skip,
All right.
Joe,
Aye.
Chris, aye. So there we have it. All right. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you on the 4th.
Have a nice evening.
Take
Yep.
care, everyone.
Okay, see you guys.
Thank you.